We have Bryan Miller on the call, and I really have been looking forward to this conversation, Bryan, because I understand that you're an active film composer. And if people tune into the video, they can see the multitude of instruments, and I think they must be album covers or something above your back door there. But what I find fascinating is that somebody that I know is probably as successful as you are when it comes to composing and the music industry, that you are pretty deep into real estate investing. So I really appreciate your time, and I really want to make sure that everybody has your contact information right off the bat. So let's start with that. If people want to chat with you or get a hold of you, what is the best way to reach you?
Sure. For the real estate related business, the best way to reach me is at Bryan, Bryan, at capitalstackinvestments.com. So Capital Stack Investments, and you can go to our website as well. So capitalstackinvestments.com. We have some giveaways there. My partner and I that run Capital Stack, we're giving away a PDF that's called 50 Lessons from 50 Deals. And it's closer to 100 of lessons. So for each rental property I bought or investment we did, we talk about what went right, what didn't go right, and the lessons we learned from that. So it can be a great resource for you, save you years of experience and probably tons of money. If you can learn from things that even if projects went right, there's always ways like it could have went better, or here's why the profit didn't turn out quite like you thought, or here's where you thought you're going to make your money on cash flow, but actually I made 130 grand on appreciation, right? Or I made, 50 grand on debt pay down. So there's just going back and looking each of the projects that I've invested in. It's just a real interesting kind of deep dive into what worked, what could have went better. What did you learn from that? What would you do different next time? So it's a great resource. It's free. So just go over to the Capital Stack Investments, fill out the form, and we'll be happy to send that to you.
Yeah. That is really something. And to your testament there, I don't think I've run into anybody who has basically wrote down a lesson for every property that they've handled and dealt with. I mean, what a great exercise and a great idea. I mean, I think more people should do that. And I think I might steal that from you.
Happy, I'd say steal away. And actually it's been interesting. I've been putting it together basically as a resource for people in our network, but actually even in going through the process, it's refreshing my memory. I'm realizing things. It's like, oh, wow. Because sometimes until you really analyze a deal, you think, oh, this worked out pretty well, or this is the deal. Like some properties are like, let's just say it's kind of a break even over the course of time. But if you look at like, oh, every year I have like $7,000 of appreciation and I have $4,000 of equity pay down. Well, that's 11 grand that I'm making, even if you're kind of at a level playing field. So there's just so many different ways to win in the real estate game that you have to look at what's happening on a macro level. And sometimes you don't realize that in year one or year two. And a lot of people starting out, they get their property and they're like, oh, wow, well, they're making, maybe a couple $100 cash flow, and then like the roof goes out, or they got a leak, or you got a refrigerator to place, all that kind of stuff. And they're like, oh, well, this just doesn't make sense. But when you look at what happens over 10 years or 15 years, just in going back and doing this exercise, it's like, oh, I started out renting it for $700 a month, and now we're at $1,300, right? So you buy it based on the numbers and trying to make sense at 700 or 750. Some of those are during like 2009, 10, 11, where rents were a little depressed because of everything that was happening in the real estate market. But now that things have swung around, you get the rent increases, you get the appreciation increase, and you just realize where you're making your money. And a lot of the income has come from appreciation. It's not something you want to bank on because you can't predict it, but the reality is buying in the better areas where you're going to get more appreciation, those have actually worked out superior to things that look better on paper. You said, oh, the cash on cash is going to be 13 on this, but it's a C+ or a C- neighborhood. The reality is you just don't get the appreciation bump in that neighborhood, where the things that you thought you were going to make 8, you actually did way better at because you got this big appreciation bump.
No, that's really interesting. So, uh, that's something to really call out here. I think a lot of people, especially when they first get into real estate investing, they are looking at those less expensive, um, maybe even poorer neighborhoods, something that might not be, the property is pretty in rough condition. Let's put it that way. But you're really looking
Right.
for trying to balance it out. We talk about the four profit centers of real estate. It sounds like you're really trying to find that balance between those four quadrants.
Well, yeah, you definitely want the cash flow to be substantial so that it's not a big drain, especially as you're getting started. You don't have as much capital. The nice thing is I have a portfolio now, so if we end up with a $2,000 unexpected expense, it kind of balances out with all the different properties we own, so it doesn't become a big deal. But when you have one and you get a $2,000 hit, it can be significant, especially if you're on the starting out phase. So it's just good to look at that. But I think I can confirm this from fellow investors and some very experienced investors. They would confirm the same thing. The numbers going into a C or C minus property look superior. Like,
Hmm.
here's the rents, but what you underestimate is the amount of grief, the amount of turnover, higher chance of having an eviction. You're renting to a tenant with a lower credit score, who is going to have more credit issues, more cash flow issues, more keeping a job issues. And
Hmm.
as a result, you're going to have more turnover, you're going to have more costs, and you're going to make less money. So
Hmm.
it's kind of counterintuitive to buy the B minus, B plus house, because you're thinking I'm not going to make as much, or I'm closer to break even on that. But the reality is you're going to get more appreciation in the nicer neighborhood. And in my experience, partly because I was buying a lot of single family in the downturn when prices were really cheap, but
Hmm.
I've definitely made the bulk of my profit from appreciation play.
No, that's really interesting, and it's kind of refreshing from what we've heard in the past from a lot of other investors. Um, so, one thing that's an obvious question that I think people are going to ask is like, how did you make this jump? I typically run into, it's kind of interesting. I've like I mentioned, we're closing in on 200 episodes of the show, and I've talked to a variety of investors. Strangely enough, there's a lot of professionals that also work in real estate. Whether it's, and it seems like it's kind of heavy towards people that are in technology, or they're heavy in like nurses and that type of stuff. I mean, you're the first
Right?
musician that I've really run into at your level to jump into this. Like, what caused you to make that leap and find this as an investment vehicle?
Sure. Well, the reality is, as a professional composer, we don't have a union. You don't have a pension plan except for the one you create for yourself, right? So I knew I wanted to make music and make a living, right? And so I was trying to figure that out. That was the maybe goal number one. But in that, I also knew that I was responsible for my own future, right? And I was responsible for my own retirement. So that was sort of the catalyst in the early, the first investments where, hey, if I can buy a house and have it paid off, well, when I reach retirement age, I'm going to have $1,000 a month or whatever coming in. And if I can get 5 of those, then that's even better, right? So that was the original kind of intent, just kind of building or buying an investment that would eventually create a large degree of passive cash flow. And I like that so much better. Kind of the traditional advice you get from a financial planner, right? Save a big chunk of money, and then you get to spend 4% of that a year, and you get to pray that you don't run out of money before you die, right? But it's at least for me, it's a very scarcity mentality kind of proposition, because you're trying to, let's say you have $1 million, which is for most people like, the American dream. Well, if you have that, it's like, well, maybe you're going to pull off, 50 grand a year off of that, depending on, what kind of investing expertise you have. But if in the market, in the 4% rule, you'd pull off 40 grand a year. right?
Mhm.
So good news, you saved $1 million. Bad news, I live in LA, so 40 grand a year is going to be, you know, a pretty tough way to approach retirement, right?
Right.
So thinking about that, and you don't want to spend more than that, because it's like, okay, the model is like you're going to run out of money. And the bad news is you got $1 million, which is the good news, but by every month you're whittling that down, right? And the hopes of like you're dying and now you're at zero and you have nothing to leave your kids. And if you miscalculate or you have a couple of bad years in the market, you know, basically you're out of luck. Where if you get $1 million of real estate, right? Or you put that same $1 million into real estate, you could actually control maybe $4 or $5 million of real estate, and you get passive cash flow off that of, you know, 30 grand a month or whatever. Every month you get to spend that, right? And then at the end, you still have your $1 million of real estate, or $5 million of real estate, depending on how you allocate this, right? But that same $1 million that's in the market, you could buy 5 million, or you could control $5 million of real estate with. So that whole idea of this stream of cash flow is just, for me especially, like, I like that freedom of knowing that next month, if I spend 20 grand a month, next month I get 20 grand coming in, right? Where the other model is, here's your 40, use it just for the entire year and then hope you don't run out. So for me, I just think it's a much superior strategy to approach that financial independent stage. And that's a beautiful thing for my music career as well, because I'm not, you know, things have gone really well, and we bought a lot of property 2009 to 2012 when everything was on sale. So now I'm in a position where that cash flow and that real estate machine is really rolling. And so it gives me more freedom in my creative choices and what I choose to do, who I choose to work for, who I choose not to work for, as opposed to in a position where, wow, I gotta keep accepting every possibility that comes my way, even if it's not very good or very lucrative, or the people involved are not the greatest people in the world and not going to be fun to spend the next 2 or 3 months with. So that's another beautiful thing about it. It does give you a lot of freedom choices, and I'm still choosing. I love writing music. That's a fun part of my world, but I also enjoy the fact that I don't have to do it, right?
Mhm.
And I get to do it, and I get to choose to do it. And so it's just a different way to come to work, knowing that this is, you know, something you're choosing to do, and that this real estate world, because it basically, you know, all of a sudden I built another business to run because it went so well. And that's the beautiful thing about real estate. Like, you start making wise choices and it'll start to snowball itself over time. Not in year 2 probably, but over the course of time, a lot of really good things happen.
You know, that's something that I really want to call out. You know, there's like an old exercise, like where, you know, uh, picking a career. I think we're told early on is that when you're picking a career, like, if you take the money out of it, what would you want to do? Well, you've essentially have pulled that off by having a portfolio that could actually really replace your daily income. But that's a career, that's a job. The scoring and the music is something that you enjoy doing anyway. So it's something that it's a it really is supportive of that concept. I really think that's neat.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. It's been a fun journey, and you know, the early years in the music business were tough. Like, you worked really, really hard to, you know, make a few bucks. But I think the same thing in the real estate. Like, in the early years, you're going to work really hard. Like, in the first couple years of us being in the real estate business, we had worked really hard. We spent a vacation kind of like rehabbing a rental house, you know, just working really hard. And then the net benefit was like, you know, maybe $100 a month of positive cash flow, maybe, right?
Hmm.
So it didn't look like it even in year 2 or year 3, but now kind of in year 16, it's like, looks like the smartest thing I could have possibly done.
Yeah. No, that's another thing that I want to call out. You mentioned, you know, $100 a month in cash flow. And I do know a couple other people that invest in that B plus class neighborhoods, and their initial, at least that first year or two, their cash flow is pretty slim. But we also have to remember that those properties typically we're looking at likely needing less repairs and upkeep compared to properties that are
Right.
older, that are in a C or C minus neighborhood, where the heater goes out or something goes out and you blow your cash flow for the year. You're typically are
Exactly.
nicer neighborhoods, nicer tenants like you are, like you mentioned, easier on the property. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits involved in it. If it's a good fit, that's something that people should really consider. So,
And that's one thing I'll give props to my wife to. Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say I was giving props to my wife because when we were looking to purchase, I was looking more on a number standpoint, like what, just basically run the math. It's all about the math, right? And she was like, I want to buy a house I want to live in, right? And
Hmm.
as a result, we bought in nicer neighborhoods. We set criteria then. We only wanted to buy things built 2000 or newer. So things were, in some cases, 4 years old, 5 years old. And so as a result, like we still haven't had tons of maintenance issues or tons of repairs because we basically bought newer stock. And that was because, there was a big expansion in Phoenix. And then when that contracted, a lot of those new houses, a lot of people had gotten upside down with them and they just chose to walk away.
Right. No, that's that's interesting strategy, and I think that it's an underlooked one, which is surprising as well. Um, Another thing that you mentioned, and I'm going to sneak back to something you said earlier. I think it's interesting that you call them like I think you have over 60 streams, quote unquote streams going now instead of 60 properties or 60 doors. I think that's interesting that you use that terminology.
Sure. It's sort of like there was a book I read like lots of years ago about multiple streams of income. So I like that concept. And so I've tried to capitalize on that. And so I have all my kind of rental doors. Each one is like a stream. But then after 2012, we started realizing like there's a lot of work to running a single family portfolio. So then I started deploying money into syndication deals, which are buying like a apartment complex or a self-storage unit or a mobile home park or like a retail shopping center. You buy that with a group of partners that all team together and pool their money, and then you can buy an asset that you basically maybe you couldn't buy on your own. And even if you could buy it on your own, you probably have to put 50-75% of your net worth in order to buy a building like that. But as a passive partner, you can put 3 or 4% of your investable income. So that allows you to get a lot of deals, which then allows you to have a more diversification, which is a safer position than having all your eggs in one basket.
Oh, sure. So can you talk a little bit about like where it sounds like maybe it's because of these syndications. Are you investing in your backyard? Or are you spreading out in some of the other states? You've mentioned Arizona already.
Sure. Well, I have property in New Mexico. That's where I grew up. I have a lot of property in Phoenix, the single families there. Multifamily, I have in Phoenix, in Atlanta. I've had stuff in Texas. So I like all the sunshine states, Atlanta, Florida, South Carolina. I like all those states with positive migration and also business friendly, especially for the buy and holds. And you're going to operate rental property. That Southeast, Midwest. I was doing some flips in Illinois, but again, political stuff does matter, right? All of a sudden, basically Illinois is bankrupt, right? So what do? Pass laws to increase property tax as a way to solve their problem,
Mhm.
right? And so all of a sudden, that's going to hamper the real estate market because nobody wants to buy into something that might be, hey, it just went up from, I forget the percentages, but like 2 to 3%. And then it might go to 4 because, it's like, where's the easy target for politicians to go get money? And it's like, oh, this target property owners. So that makes it less desirable to own property. More people, it's actually a state where there's net migration. People are leaving that state. So maybe you could get lucky there, but I'd rather bet on the odds and the math of a state like Texas or Arizona, where you have a lot of a business-friendly climate, and you also have a lot of population growth, a lot of job growth. Those are good. So for long-term holds, I like those markets, but I do invest a lot in Los Angeles, my home backyard, and I do development deals here. So I do a lot of like building 9-unit apartments, building 11-unit apartments, building single family homes to sell. And part of the reason is you can build for under 200 square foot here or across the country, right? The
Mhm.
costs are pretty similar, but in LA, you can sell that product then for 450, 550, 850, $1,000 a square foot, depending on how nice a neighborhood you're in, right? So if you can build for 200 and sell for 500, there's your delta of the math. So I like that play for what we call increasing our capital stack, because it's good if you have 100 grand and you're making cash flow off of that. Even if you're making 10% cash flow, well, you're making $10,000, and
Mhm.
that's not enough for most people. 10,000 a year is not going to cut it for retirement, right? So the goal is, yes, you want cash flow, you want those streams, that's good, but you also want pops to your capital. You want to grow your capital stack so you can get to that $1 million or $2 million of capital. And then when you're making 8-10% off of that, that becomes more of a position of being in a kind of a life-changing position. So I like to utilize both strategies. And I have a little bit of rental real estate in California, but very little, because again, the political risk, there's a lot
Mhm.
of free rent kind of, hey, everybody should have free rent. There should be eviction moratorium, especially right now, things that can make it really tough as a property owner. So I'd rather be renting in Texas or in Phoenix or a more friendly state. But I still there's still opportunity here. You just have to cater your strategy for the market and what the market's willing to give you in that market.
No, that's really something that should be noted, that you seem to adapt to the situation depending on the environment. I mean, and that's just a preconception. I wouldn't, I've talked to a few people, investors from California, but they never seem to invest in California in any way. So that's interesting that you found this building niche, this development niche that can produce results, and adapting to what's around you is there's definitely some opportunity to be had.
Sure. And it can provide superior results in some ways, right? In getting that pop. But then in order to basically take your other capital and then turn it on to autopilot and create that stream of rental income, then I want to move that into basically a different state. So just kind of utilizing strategy, like there's opportunity everywhere. You just kind of have to pick it. Like I actually invest in a fund in New York right now, and they're buying like properties in the Hamptons and like the super high end kind of New York real estate. But it's a very interesting distressed debt play, right? That distressed debt, when it goes into default in New York, the interest rates bump to 24%, right? So they
Mhm.
have a real interesting strategy of basically acquiring those notes that are going to be earning at that rate, as long as there's enough cushion there that they're confident someone's going to go buy their note, because maybe they're at 65% loan to value. So they're quite confident somebody's going to come buy that note, and then they're going to basically be able to capitalize on that situation. But they're not doing buy and hold in that market. They see an opportunity, they developed a business strategy, and then as a syndicated partner, I get to come along and kind of invest in that business alongside them.
Yeah. So, just to remind everybody, if you're interested in what Bryan is talking about, and definitely take him up on those 50 lessons. I guess it's closer to 100 lessons now. It's a free download on his website, Bryan at capitalstackinvestments.com. And if you head over to the show notes, I'll make sure to put the appropriate links there. But another thing that I heard about you is that you're so deep now into this real estate investing that you've even invested your children's college fund in there.
Yes. So I actually I started Coverdale's for them, and a Coverdale is a type of educational saving account. You can actually self-direct those. So if you've learned the real estate game and know the real estate game, it's possible then to take those funds that you put into the ESA, invest those in real estate, or maybe use that as, like, if you're a wholesaler, Jack, right? So
Yep.
you could take a couple grand from your kid's account and use it as kind of your earnest money deposit or your option deposit, right? To do a flip. And then if you can sell that for 10 grand, then that 10 grand, if it's earned by the ESA, if the ESA is doing this transaction, right? It's the entity that you put on the wholesaling contract, then it's entitled to earn that 10 grand and and then the 10 grand comes back to the educational savings account, which can be used for college. But the beautiful thing is it's very much like a Roth IRA. So all those proceeds are not taxed; they're tax free. So it's a way to basically grow your kids' college savings through real estate.
No, that's interesting. I think there's a lot of people that are struggling, especially with the cost of college these days, on how they're going to pay for it. And this is a great strategy that people should probably consider. And I actually didn't think of a self-directed IRA in that light. I mean, that's a slightly new spin on it. I know these self-directed IRAs are available, but you can use them
Right.
in this type of situation too.
Yeah, I think I have 9 different self-directed accounts. So from a defined benefit plan to a 401k plan to IRAs, Roth IRAs, the kids savings account, health savings account, you can also turn into a self-directed account. So there's a lot of options there. And, you know, whether you're investing in stocks or in real estate, the idea of being able to self-direct that and have your own investing options, it's a beautiful thing.
So I'm going to backtrack just a hair, because, you know, we were talking about that new construction, and I get a lot of people asking how they find, whether it's general contractors and builders and construction people, and how far you trust them. And you know, we could just go on, and we probably could dedicate an entire episode just on that topic alone. But how have you found your builders, and do you do your general contracting on your own?
No, not on my own, but I would say in the kind of the big picture answer to that is very carefully you choose them, right? I think a lot of like learning how to do due diligence and do research and do background checks. Like it's possible to actually have a lawyer or yourself. There's like services like Truth Finder, put in the guy's name, as much information as you find, and then you find out like he's got 4 lawsuits, he's not paying his kids' child support, whatever. You can find lots of red flags there, and you don't want to find those after you've lent somebody 50 grand or partnered with someone on a building. You want to find out that before you do that, right? And so it's really important, I think, references. But again, all this stuff I learned some of the hard way. Like you have to be careful about reference. Sometimes the reference might have a vested interest in the outcome of the deal. So they're really not a neutral party to give you advice. So it's really important to find, like, if I invest with someone, like I'm making a new sizable investment into a mobile home park investor, right? And so, you know, knowing what I know now, I asked for a list of resources. I've called those investors. I've done other information on his company, his reputation. I've asked around. I'm in some investing forums online. People talk about their experiences with that investor, whether they've been good or whether they've been bad. The reality is you don't know when you're on your own. And I would advise you not to make a partnership blind. Like do a lot of research, spend some time. It's very much like a marriage. Like you don't want to wake up the next morning in Vegas and realize you're married and you have no idea who you're married to, right? And especially if they are entitled to 50% of everything you own. So you have to make those choices very carefully. I'm a firm believer in partnerships now. I used to be very much on my own, but I realize there's much more you can accomplish with partnerships. But there is risk in a partnership, and you have to really learn to vet those out. Like let's just say we were going to do a deal together, Jack. It's like, okay, who do I know that's done business with Jack in the past? Who's his former business partners? Can I get a hold of them? If they say like, well, he skipped the business and still owes us 100 grand. Okay, that's something I need to know. If they say Jack's the greatest guy in the world, I would love to do business with him again. You know, you'll find out the truth by talking to a lot of people that don't have an invested interest. Sometimes you don't know people have an invested interest. That's why you have to talk to a lot of different people. But I've found out interesting things just from, I flew to Oregon to look at investing in this deal, a development deal. Everything looked great. The guy casually mentioned a mutual acquaintance. I talked to the mutual acquaintance, and he didn't come out right away, but by the end of the conversation, I started asking some questions like, do you like this person? Yes. Do you trust this person? Yes. Would you invest with this person again? No. And it's like, oh, wait, what's under that? And to try to talk to them about what's that. So even it took some digging even in that, because to figure out, okay, good. So I passed on that investment based on that feedback, but that was, it was because of asking a lot of questions and paying attention, and then any kind of mutual connection or people, or if you can look at their LinkedIn, oh, this person's also connected. I also know this person. That's a good way to say, like, oh, there's 5 people. So you reach out to the people in your network and say, hey, what about this guy? Is this guy a good guy? What was your experience? But it takes a lot of time, but you got to realize if you're investing 50 grand or 100 grand into a deal, it takes a lot of time to make that money back, right? So you have to be very cautious on that. And that's partly like with Capital Stack, what we do is we only work with proven partners. So sometimes we'll help to raise capital for a deal, but we only want to do that with a partner that has already performed for us, or we have some experience and history with, because people that do the right thing tend to keep doing the right thing, and people that kind of shortchange the system or less than ethical, there's usually signs, and usually the problem is you don't look at those signs early on. You just get real attracted to the deal. So it's really important to look very thoroughly at all the signs before you jump.
So with that, I warned you that we were probably going to go 20, 30 minutes, and we've already went beyond that. But with that being said, and before we make sure everybody has your contact information again, I always end with, is there a question that you wished I would have asked tonight?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the main thing that I want to, I know your audience, a lot of people are getting started. They're trying to learn about this business. Is it smart? Is it not smart? I can tell you it's worked out really well for me, but it's worked out really well after a while, right? So it's going to take a time. I think if you're diligent at it, read the Millionaire Real Estate Investor, right? There's a model there for buying 1 or 2 houses a year over 20 years, ending up with your 40 houses, and just a way to keep cash out refinancing, using that same capital then to buy more houses. That's just a simple model, but like to read that and get the vision of that, like, oh, what's possible, right? And it is possible. It's just, can you find 2 deals a year? If you work at it, yes. And can you acquire those? And then can you cash out refinance from the ones you bought in year 1 to buy more in year 5? More than likely, yes, right? So the main thing I just want to encourage people, like, get started, do a lot of research, educate yourself, and then at some point you have to jump, and then you'll learn from jumping, and then jump a second time, and then keep after it. And it probably won't get pretty till maybe a few years down the road, but it does get really nice over the course of time, because you're paying down your property, your rents are going up, your mortgage is fixed. There's a lot of good things that happen over the course of time.
No, I really appreciate your time, and make sure we'll include those links in the show notes. Definitely take Bryan up on his offer and download those lessons learned. I can't frankly believe that you're willing to give that amount of information away, because I'm a big proponent, and I'm sure my audience is tired of me saying it. You either can put in those 10,000 hours or learn from somebody who's put in those 10,000 hours. And if you're so freely willing to give
Good
that
point.
amount of information out, please take Bryan up on that. You will definitely find that over at that capitalstackinvestments.com. And I wanted to call out a few things that I learned from our chat tonight. And one of them is learn from your lessons. And I already just pushed the concept of downloading your sheet. But what an awesome exercise that people should consider going through on a regular basis is, what lessons have we learned whether it's a good lesson or if or if it went right or if it went wrong. There's something to always to be learned there, and probably jot it down because I think somebody else might find some value in it. Um, Learn the niche in your backyard. I really thought that was interesting that even in LA, although you're not holding rental properties, you have still found a way to capitalize on the situation there. Fantastic. And then don't make blind partnerships. And that not only goes towards investors, but when you're selecting contractors, it's amazing how many people um, take the first contractor that returns their call. And I understand how busy contractors are, and sometimes you're desperate, but I think that's really important to try to vet those out because you are building a partnership and usually long-term commitments there that if you both benefit, it can be a long-term partnership. So I really appreciate your time, Bryan. This has been fantastic. And as always, I really would love to have you back on the show sometime. We probably could spend, like I said, entire episode talking about some of these just single topics, and we just basically brush the surface.
Good. Well, hope your listeners find it enjoyable. Thank you so much for having me, Jack. It's a real pleasure to be here, and always learning and growing. Right, I'm doing the same thing. I'm always trying to learn and grow and get better at this. And but it's been a real pleasure.
Well, thanks, and thanks for the lessons. Have a good night.